Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings, such as they are. I'm your host with the moster, Dusty O'Connell. Joining me, Vikings blogger extraordinaire, generally useful human, and now writer-analyst for Minneapolis' own 1500 ESPN, Arif Hassan. How you doing, Arif?
I'm good, man. I'm great. Jobs are great. How are you?
Especially this one. You know, one would think, I'm so proud of you. There is no one I can think of that deserves a larger platform for the kind of work they do, you know, football regarding at least, than you. So, congratulations.
Appreciate it, man. I'm super excited. I'm living the dream.
Such as it is. Joining us again, you may remember him from an episode we taped during the off season. I believe it was like May, the first or second week of May or something. Anyway, he writes for the Bleeding Green Times, the Daily Norseman, or not the Daily Norseman, the SB Nation Philadelphia Eagles blog, which suddenly is much more important to us than it was when we taped the last podcast. Joining us this week again, Ben Natan. What's up, man?
Not much. I just had my first day of classes today, so I was just going over some syllabi earlier this evening.
Got to get that first question on every quiz, right?
Exciting times we live in. Yeah, exactly.
Well, we're glad to have you back, Ben. We look forward to hearing all about whether Sam Bradford is terrible or merely bad.
Oh, man.
Exactly.
I'll sugarcoat it.
Exactly. Well, yeah, I mean, you don't have to. I mean, I imagine there is a not that small cadre of Vikings fans who would prefer the non-sugar-coated explanation, and it seems like they're already kind of circling the wagons. But before we launch into, I guess, the news of the last couple of weeks, I did want to take a moment and thank all of the people who have contributed to Norse Code in the past. Your dollars keep the lights on here and allow us to bring you the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings week in and week out, unless something truly horrifying happens right before the season starts and we have to take a week to get our heads together and maybe write a long-form piece about the eventual results of that unfortunate situation. I would also like to take a moment to thank Jeff Swoboda for joining the team, the Patreon team that is, of recurring donors to Norse Code. You too can join the team by going to patreon.com/NorseCode and become a contributing member of the show once a month, every month, in perpetuity for any dollar amount you would like. Jeff contributed at the $5 a month amount. Our most popular donation level is $3.50. And due to your generous contributions month in and month out, we were able to keep the Loch Ness Monster at bay, among other things. If you would like to make a one-time donation, you can certainly do that by going to paypal.com/NorseCode and throwing us a few bucks. Whatever you think it's worth to you to get the kind of analysis that you get on, it's so funny, in the last few weeks, the Vikings podcast community has grown, and the I guess approximate degree of talent has gone up significantly. But we are committed to remaining #1, if only in our own minds. So help us do that and throw a few bucks to the cause. And now that we have gotten that nonsense out of the way, I hear that something might have happened to the Vikings starting quarterback, and a flurry of personnel decisions were made, some of which you, Ben, might be an expert on.
Well, expert's a fun way of putting it, but I did put up with Sam Bradford for well over a year, and I had to rationalize the team trading for him. The Eagles traded a second-round pick and Nick Foles for him, and I had to rationalize that and kind of talk myself into being like, oh, this is actually good. And then
it is a little bit easier given that one of the pieces was Nick Foles, I imagine.
That's true. That is true. But that was the offseason where the Eagles were going to be theoretically trading up for Mariota, and there was that instant where it's yeah. So I had to talk myself into being like, oh, Sam Bradford is actually a better option than Mariota. And then I did again last spring be like, all right, signing Sam Bradford to a 2-year deal and then drafting a 24-year-old quarterback from North Dakota State is also a good idea, because I have Stockholm syndrome, because that's what sports fandom is. So I would have some expertise on the situation with Sam Bradford and his quote unquote abilities.
After a whole year and a half, you still don't sound terribly convinced about.
No, I'm not, and it's Sam Bradford is like this weird enigma, because he'll have some moments where he makes this like gorgeous throw, and I swear to God, like I think if the NFL was a 7-on-7 league, I think Bradford would be one of the best quarterbacks in the league, because he's just such a good natural passer. He's a very strong arm. He's very accurate, but I don't really know if there's a really nice way of putting this, but he's just a coward. I mean, he's just not the type of quarterback you really want commanding your offense, because he doesn't have. It's not necessarily a poise thing so much as like what he's willing to do as a passer, what he's willing to do with his arm consistently as a passer. And Arif and I talked about this, but I mean, he's consistently willing to bypass the play, honestly, like bypass the play, the design of the play, in order to take an easier throw, and he'll consciously avoid taking chances in order to get that check down or get that, that drag route, or, some middling throw that doesn't really do anything for the offense, instead of taking chances down the field. And that was one of the big reasons. I said this back in May when the Eagles drafted Carson Wentz. And let me make it clear, I was not a big fan of Carson Wentz during the draft process.
Weren't you?
Yeah, I was very well documented, not a big Carson Wentz guy. But I did say, before and after the Eagles drafted him, even leading up to the draft when you knew the Eagles were going to take him, I did say that I'd much rather see Wentz play instead of Bradford, because with Bradford, you're just going to check down the season. Like, he's just going to, game after game, you're going to get these, 5-yard dink-and-dunk passes. Every so often you're going to see this, pretty long ball down the field, and you're like, oh, maybe he can do that consistently. But he never does, or he hasn't done. And with Wentz, there's lots of things to be critical with Wentz about, but the main thing with Wentz that I actually like is he's aggressive. He goes down the field. He's poised. He's not really afraid of a throw. He's not really afraid of a moment, which is something I can at least appreciate as a fan and an analyst. But I will say this about Bradford, because you have to have some kind of positivity in this situation, because if you don't, then, it's all doom and gloom. But with Bradford, he's never been really in a situation where he's given consistency at supporting cast, and he's not been ever really given consistency at offensive coordinator. And his time, he started off his career, he had that really nice rookie season under Shermer, who's now in Minnesota, and ever since then his career has been marred by coordinator changes, bad supporting cast, and injuries. And even when he was in Philadelphia, where he was able to stay relatively healthy, he did lose a lot of plays to bad receiver play or bad offensive line play. The running game was not as good as everyone anticipated, although I will say that the running game probably suffered a little bit by his inability to kind of create a vertical element to the offense. But I think that in Minnesota, and this is me being positive, but in Minnesota, he's getting his best supporting cast he's ever gotten. The offensive line there isn't great from my understanding, but it's better than what was going on in Philadelphia last season. Last season, the Eagles' interior offensive line was just horrendous for most of the beginning of the season. And I'm sure you're going to get much better rushing production out of Adrian Peterson.
I don't know if when we talk about supporting cast, the upgrade that we're going to talk about is at the offensive line. I think the offensive line was bad, but...
Yeah, bad, but yeah, maybe it's push at the offensive line. But at the running backs, obviously, you have Adrian Peterson, Jerick McKinnon, who are an obvious upgrade over whatever the hell DeMarco Murray was last season, and also Ryan Matthews, who, as talented as he is, a wind gust just takes him out of health. And at the receiver position, maybe another one of those push things, but I think that Stephon Diggs, honestly, during his rookie year, was probably better than anyone on the Eagles, not named Jordan Matthews. And, having Stephon Diggs, having maybe Laquan Treadwell, depending on whether or not he can get onto the field, and also Charles Johnson, I think that's a much better group of three at the receiving. I got that right? Those are probably going to end up being the three guys at receiver for Bradford.
Yeah, it depends on whether or not Thielen pushes for playing time, but those are the three. So, who are the three on the Eagles to compare to? Aguilar, Huff, and Matthews, or who's the third receiver?
Oh my God, Miles Austin. Oh God.
Oh, good Lord.
That was just. I'm not sure how many games you'd watched of Bradford, but there was a game against one of his best games was his first game against the Washington football team, where he had like 2 or 3 passes, like beautifully placed passes right to Miles Austin, that Miles Austin either dropped or just like refused to play. And that's what I'm talking about. It's like Bradford, I feel like Bradford had his nice moments were so few and far between, but like his nice moments were so often let down by just the receiver completely forgetting how to play football. So I think with Minnesota, you have a much more stable situation in terms of the coaching situation is a lot more stable. The coordinator situation is a lot more stable. The defense is going to be a lot better than what he was getting in Philadelphia. That's going to be all very important because I do have faith. Like I have this weird faith that with the right organizational confidence, I feel like Bradford can end up being an Alex Smith type of player. And a tweet that Eagles Twitter loves to bring up for me back in December of last year, where I was looking at Alex Smith, and Alex Smith was playing really, really well. And I said, when you watch Alex Smith play, this is the reason you would keep Bradford for another year. And the reason I said that is because if you are able to kind of maintain organizational confidence in a player, while also kind of keeping consistency with the supporting cast, keeping consistency with the coaching staff, then you're going to create a comfortable environment for a quarterback to really take chances. And then when a quarterback's taking chances, they're able to excel. And I think that's such an underrated aspect of quarterbacking in this league when you talk about teams' abilities to really let a guy go out there and make mistakes so they don't have to be afraid of making mistakes anymore. I think we saw that development with Andy Dalton over the course of his career. He was up and down really his whole career, but Cincinnati was constantly investing this faith into him and saying, you're the starter, you're going out there, you're going to play, do your thing, we're not taking you off the field, just play to win. And I think because of that, year after year, you finally got this year in his 5th season where he just was playing out of his mind. And I think that was a product of the confidence that the organization was able to put into him. Now, obviously, Bradford's a little bit older, but I think that can still happen. You saw it happen with Alex Smith, where Harbaugh was able to kind of instill that confidence in him. Ironically, he had his job taken by Colin Kaepernick, but and then Andy Reid did the same thing. You're the starter. They gave him a new contract. You're still the starter. And Alex Smith had a really nice season this past season. So if you're looking at this Bradford thing from the perspective of a 1, possibly 2-year stopgap between him and hopefully Teddy Bridgewater coming back healthy, I think that this is a good situation for him to come into where the talent around him and the coaching staff around him will kind of allow him to be more comfortable while also not asking him to be the guy. And is that going to win the Vikings a Super Bowl? Probably not, unless their defense just starts playing at absolutely absurd levels, which is technically possible. But I think it's enough for the team to be really competitive in the North still. And as much as I would love the Vikings to give the Eagles a top 5 pick this year, the reality is that the roster is a lot better than that. And even though Bradford doesn't really have a history of winning, like I said before, you could have an Alex Smith type situation where great defense, strong running game, and smart football management leads to, a nice season, a possible playoff run.
Okay, well, there's a lot of things that you said that I want to talk about, so I'm just going to go through what I wrote down. So first, I think you talked a little bit about how Sam Bradford is scared in some ways, and I wrote one of the headline parts of the piece that I wrote is that Sam Bradford does not play scared, and I think we talk about two different things when we mean that, and I think you even mentioned the distinction. I think that you're right that Bradford plays too cautiously. But I think one thing of note, and I think this kills quarterbacks even more than being too cautious or not being comfortable, is being scared of pass rushing pressure. And I think that for a positive, I think that Sam Bradford at a baseline level is absolutely not scared of pass rush pressure. Have you come to sort of the same conclusions, or do you think that he reacts too quickly or whatever?
I think that I don't think it's like a Blaine Gabbert type of situation in the pocket. I think he actually is pretty good in the pocket. But in terms of his, like, when I was referring to scared, I was talking about really testing coverages.
Right. But, like, he's probably going to have a low interception rate in a world where his receivers, catch the ball a little bit more often, and that a lot of that has to do with his unwillingness to test, tight windows and throw deep downfield. So that's a different kind of scared. Different kind of scared,
and it's also worth noting that I think that he's very much a rhythm type of player where you can't really cold start him. He needs to be able to kind of get into a rhythm to really get those throws down the field. And the flip side of that is that he can kind of snowball, where if he starts getting hit a lot or receivers start dropping a lot more passes, then he's going to become even more conservative. And that's he's not going to completely shut down. With when Mark Sanchez was playing, Mark Sanchez has a tendency to really, really snowball, where like one turnover turns into three turnovers, turns into like a sack, turns into like really bad sacks, and it's not that type of thing. But you're going to see, if he starts getting hit, then he's going to start wanting to get the ball out quicker, and it's just like you go from like a center right to like all the way conservative type of player. If you get what I'm saying, it's just like really, really
center right. I like that.
Yeah. So it's about kind of keeping. It's not so much in the pocket, but if he starts getting hit a lot, then it will become. He'll start to limit the game plan even more.
Well, okay, so that brings up another point. So that's about 3 times now that you've brought up the concept of quarterback comfort, and in some contexts that means making sure that the play is well structured around him, which includes sort of keeping the pocket clean. That also includes, to some extent, continuity. How can Sam Bradford possibly be comfortable not just moving to he's already had this offensive not offensive coordinator, but sort of offense. And there is, a quarterback coach here, but he's moving to an entirely new offense with terminology he hasn't used in years, and a completely new supporting cast. It might be a better supporting cast, but it's a completely new supporting cast. How can he possibly be comfortable from the perspective of, all of the things that we've talked about with Sam Bradford in the past? I mean, we talk a lot about how his offensive coordinators have turned over every year. I think he's had something like 6 offensive coordinators in 7 years, or 5 in 6 years, or something like that. And now he's got another offensive coordinator in another year, which sort of adds to that list of problems. Which, again, I mean, the Alex Smith comparison makes a lot of sense. Same thing happened to Alex Smith forever. But I think that this matches instead of solves that problem for Sam Bradford. So how could he be comfortable given, one, that change in offensive coordinator again, 2, a change in environment again, and 3, the fact that, and I legitimately think that the Minnesota Vikings offensive line is the worst in the NFL. I think it was worse than the Eagles by a significant margin last year. How can he be comfortable in a situation where he's going to get more hits per dropback? He's going to have another new offensive coordinator once again, and this time he's not only in a completely new environment, but he has completely new teammates. If comfort is so important to him.
I think that the ways that those are going to be able to happen is probably going to end up being Shermer possibly stepping up into a bigger role in terms of formulating a game plan, working directly with Sam Bradford. I know that wasn't Shermer's initial job when he got brought into Minnesota, but I mean, if Zimmer, that just seems like the logical thing to do. If Zimmer really wants to make this thing go over smoothly, and Turner wants to make this thing go over smoothly, they're probably going to be consulting with Shermer a lot on how to work with Bradford, and that's going to be probably a big part. And it's going to be about keeping the game plan really simple, keeping the playbook really simple for him, for the team early on before you can get really comfortable with some of the more complex, like the complexities of it. And also just running the ball a ton. And, the Vikings offensive line, it being worse than the Eagles is true, but the Vikings also have another viable threat in the backfield where the Eagles really did not, where teams didn't really have to respect the run against the Eagles the way that they have to respect the run against Minnesota. They could really just depend on their defensive line to make plays in the backfield because DeMarco Murray wasn't doing anything and the offensive line wasn't really creating space for Ryan Matthews or Darren Sproles on a consistent basis. So having Adrian Peterson, having Jerick McKinnon in the backfield with him is going to really help him because teams aren't going to be this sounds kind of ridiculous, but teams won't be game planning around stopping Sam Bradford. And it's going to open the field up a little bit more for him. So I think the combination of being able to run the ball successfully, run the ball a lot, and possibly simplifying the game plan as well as keeping Shermer involved in the process, which kind of seems arduous. But I feel like the Vikings have already gone to such great lengths to make this whole Sam Bradford thing happen in the first place that they're going to probably continue to try to do whatever it takes to keep him comfortable and make sure he can be as successful as possible in this situation. So probably some combination of those three things.
So I think this brings up a couple of other questions. The first, I think, is something that you've alluded to a couple of times in the most recent question, which is, involving Pat Shermer. So Pat Shermer cannot create new plays. He can be involved in the game plan. He can be, involved in finding the concepts that Bradford is most comfortable with when it comes to North Turner designing a game plan for a game. But there's a limit to what he can do because the playbook, it already exists. You're not going to change the playbook a week before the season and hope that 24 players in the offense can learn a changed playbook that has not been installed yet just to accommodate Sam Bradford. So there's some limit to how much you can control for that. But even after you find ways to, let's say, you simplify everything. You have mirrored passing concepts, for example, so that the playbook is functionally smaller. You have a playbook that uses concepts that Bradford is familiar with time and time again, say with his time with Schottenheimer, for example. Let's say you've got all of these things that maximize the possibility of Bradford to get comfortable. How long do you think? And this is more this is a question a little bit about Sam Bradford, but also a little bit about just quarterbacking in general. How long do you think it would take for Bradford to be able to effectively play the majority of snaps at quarterback for Minnesota?
I feel like it would probably take two or 3 weeks at the least to kind of allow him to get comfortable. And this could have been fluff when he first came to Philadelphia, but there was a lot of talk about how quickly he picked up the playbook and how good of a study he is and everything like that. But realistically, it's going to take, I think, 2 or 3 weeks for him to really get comfortable with it.
All right. Well, so if it takes him 2 or 3 weeks to get comfortable with it, then I think that brings up the question of how many games did the Vikings trade for with Bradford? And I think that is maybe not as relevant of a question if they traded for 14 games. Maybe that's not as big a deal, but Bradford also has a very lengthy injury history. He's injured the same shoulder 4 times in his career, if you include college, and he's missed, I think, over 20 games as a result of just the shoulder. He's torn the same ACL twice, which once you tear the same ACL a second time, then there's an increased incidence for that ACL re-tearing, which is different than if you tear your other ACL. Do you think it's reasonable to just expect that Bradford may miss games because of injury this year?
Yes, he missed 2.5 games with the Eagles last year with a concussion.
Right. So,
yeah.
Especially with an offensive line that, again, gives up more hits than I think any other offensive line, even though the offensive line has improved with the addition of Alex Boone, possibly with Andre Smith. I think that he gets hit a lot. So with all that in mind, he misses, say, 2 games because he has to learn the playbook. maybe he misses, and I think it's not optimistic, but I don't think it's pessimistic either. Maybe he misses another 2 games. So do you think that Minnesota still makes the right move in a world where they only get 12 games of this upgrade at quarterback? And this is the fundamental question, right? Like, how much is a first-round pick worth? How much, does Sam Bradford add? And I think that related to all of that is that you may only get 12 games from him.
Well, another question you have to ask, unfortunately, is how bad is Teddy Bridgewater's leg? And if this is a trade for 2 years of Sam Bradford or just 1 year of Sam Bradford. Because I think if you're trading for 2 years of Bradford, and then theoretically you get him full off season with the playbook, and that's like 14 games in 2017, and you give him continuity, and you're trading. I mean, and this has always been the Bradford thing: is upside, and this this legend of Sam Bradford's upside, and I used legend very, very loosely.
Were you making air quotes when you said it?
Yeah, I was. Yeah, exactly. If the team thinks they can get Alex Smith, if the team thinks they can get 2011 to 2016 Alex Smith in the next 2 years from Bradford, with what quarterbacks are worth, I would say that's worth a first-round pick. If they think they can, go on a run with Bradford, get a shot at, a division title, everything like that. Like, that's the type of quarterback you want on your football team anyway. I'm not saying that is what Bradford will be. And a lot of things have to go right for Bradford to kind of turn it on like that. But, desperation makes us do crazy things. So it makes sense in a way. Like, from their perspective, I can understand trading that first round pick. I'm happy, as an Eagles fan, I'm happy for my team to receive that first round pick. But I can understand that desperation is what led the Eagles to trade for Bradford anyway.
Well, yeah. So let me ask you this: every team that has quote unquote, I'm air quoting too, invested in Bradford has gotten a pretty good return in terms of like trade value, picks, etc., as he goes on to go do other things, even though he's never really been that successful. Like, there's got to be a scenario where the Vikings manage to trade Bradford away and get more than he's worth, right? Because that has kind of been like the whole story of his career.
I mean, wouldn't that be a beautiful story that he balled out this year for God knows what reason?
Well, but dude, he's never balled out, and every team that's traded him away has gotten more than they traded away to get him.
Well, it's certainly possible, and I mean that's basically what happened with the Eagles, where they signed him to that 2-year deal and then drafted Wentz, and then when they drafted Wentz, I was like, just get rid of Bradford, get him out of here, please. And
this would be one of those situations where it is possible to have a win-win, because I think the Eagles are. What counts as deep, right? At quarterback, obviously, your opinions of Bradford and Daniel and Wentz, but from the perspective of organizational investment, they're certainly deep at quarterback. The Vikings needed a quarterback. Some trade between the two could possibly be a win-win. So it's not as if this is zero sum. If someone wins, someone loses. But the question, I think, and I think it makes sense for Eagles fans to be super ecstatic about this trade. If I thought Bradford was a better quarterback than he was, and if I thought he wasn't, injury prone, I still think Eagles fans would be happy, because a first round pick is pretty nice. It salvages sort of some of the future that was not future, some of the investment that was sacrificed to get Carson Wentz. So you basically bought $12 million of Bradford in order to buy. Carson, in order to pay for some of Carson Wentz, on layaway or something, right? So it is possible that it's a win-win. So the fact that Eagles fans are ecstatic about this, and it seems like they're almost universally ecstatic about this, is not an indication that the Vikings necessarily lost the trade. It's all sort of the other stuff that's sort of an open question. I do have this to ask, though. If it takes, say, 2 weeks for Bradford to get involved, which is the estimate I put in my article too, so we definitely agree there. There's still a couple of weeks where you probably get discount Bradford, right? There's no way you get peak Bradford. The question is whether or not you get average Bradford or discount Bradford, which I know sounds weird. You get a poor man's Bradford instead of Bradford for a couple of weeks while he's working with a limited playbook, right? I mean, like, there's no way a smaller playbook is definitely better than an average size playbook, right?
Oh, for sure. And obviously, coming off the bench and shaking off a little bit of rust from this whole situation and not playing regular season snaps since, December, then yeah, there's going to be some rust. There's going to be some jitters. I mean, for whatever it's worth, he looked outstanding in preseason, but he also looked outstanding in preseason last year too.
Hey, well, let's talk a little bit about the legend of Bradford. And I think that one thing that adds to the legend, quote unquote, is that it is 100% completely fair to say that his supporting cast was bad. And this was an argument I was initially pretty suspicious of because we heard it every year with Bradford. They invested second-round pick after second-round pick after first-round pick in receivers. They grabbed offensive linemen. He moves to another team where he has a different set of receivers. But you watch the games, and I was even suspicious of the idea that, hey, maybe he had he led the league in drop rate in the NFL last year. He led the league in drop rate in 2013. He had a pretty high drop rate, back in 2010. Maybe it's his fault because, like with Colin Kaepernick, the drops are often his fault because of poor ball placement and because he just rifles those passes in there, and he doesn't throw a catchable ball. And it's not. I watch these games. It's not the case. It's not Bradford's fault that his receivers are ass. Right? It's not his fault that pressure comes as quickly as it does. He legitimately has a very poor supporting cast and has consistently had some of the worst supporting casts in the NFL. And it's easy to be sympathetic for Bradford, but at the same time, once you recognize that, it feels like it's also easy to overrate him, right? Especially because of the sympathy aspect.
Yeah, and that's honestly what happened with a lot of Eagles writers, including myself, last offseason, where you're watching these plays, you're watching how bad his supporting cast is, and you're like, oh, well, this team is much better. And you should get more of his wow moments here, and you're going to have guys who take advantage of his wow moments. But the reality with the Eagles was the supporting cast wasn't that much better. The receivers were all right at best and, not even. And the running game was atrocious. The interior offensive line play was atrocious. And then there was just games where by the time the offense got moving for the Eagles, and it took the team basically an entire first half of the season for the offense to really kind of start finding its rhythm, then the defense was exhausted because, the way that Chip Kelly was running, the defense was on the field so much. The defense was trying to pull their weight in the first half of the season, and they just got worn down over the first half of the season by the last 6 games. They were exhausted, and then you're putting a lot of pressure on the offense. And regardless, in my opinion, regardless of how well the supporting cast is playing, I just don't think that Bradford has ever gotten to a point in his career, even at peaks, where he can really command the offense, where he's like the playmaker on the offense. It's just not who he is. And like I said before, you're really just getting a guy who, at his best can be like a really good or can be a pretty good facilitating quarterback who can occasionally make that play down the field, who can occasionally make that window pass. And yeah, that was the thing for him, where just the supporting cast wasn't great. And then we're kind of doing it again right now, where we're like, well, the running game is going to be better, the receivers are going to be better, the offensive line might not be better, but the defense is going to be better. So, there's definitely room for him to be better based on the supporting cast he's given. But, where there's a pattern, there's a pattern. And there's always, and when there's smoke, there's fire. And when he's consistently on losing teams the way that he has been, and the common denominator has always been him on those teams, there's something to be said about that. And there's something to be said about the fact that other quarterbacks in this league have played with worse teams and have played better. So it's a double-edged sword. I do think that there's room for him to improve, but I think that just like the league belief that he can be a much better quarterback based on a scene change is a little bit of a fallacy.
Yeah, I'm really curious about this because it is really hard not to feel sympathetic for Bradford watching a couple of these plays, and I feel like a lot of what's written about Bradford from people, really intelligent people, Kean Fahey, for example, the people at Pro Football Focus, I think it's influenced by the fact that his receiving core and his supporting cast are objectively pretty bad, and so the issue I think I have is that while it is sort of emotionally appealing, I'm a little bit worried because having bad players around you does not mean that you yourself are good. And then also, in order to get to, achieve sort of all of the potential, that Sam Bradford might have or could be as a quarterback, you're probably not going to get that except for near the end of the season, 3-4 games for the year, because it takes a long time for, quarterbacks to get, involved in an offense, especially when they don't have an offseason with that offense. So, the Vikings may be the perfect situation for Bradford if the situation that the Vikings presented Bradford with was more akin to a common quarterback situation where he comes in at the beginning of the offseason, gets the playbook right away, gets chemistry with the receivers, has the ability to get reps with the receivers, has the ability to get live game reps, all those sorts of things. If not everyone, if the common belief around the NFL is correct, that Sam Bradford can be so much more than he is, how long does it take for him to be that in a situation that really, in many ways, replicates his previous situations? New offensive coordinator, new team, whatever, receiving core probably better, much worse offensive line, etc.
I think it's just going to take a while because he needs to be able to build that confidence. So you're really looking at, and like I said, for the Eagles, it took really almost half the season for him to kind of get that rhythm with the offense and look sharp before, he started consistently making those throws, making those plays. So I would say 6-8 games.
All right. So that's kind of curious. So my next question is related to the value of a first-round pick. Obviously, the fourth-round pick, plays a role here, and I don't want to discount the value of that. I think that all of us have discounted the value of the fourth-round pick because that's not the headliner. It's the first-round pick, obviously. A lot of people have been talking about, hey, first-round picks aren't guarantees, right? You could get Troy Williamson. You could get Matt Khalil. You could get Danny Watkins, whatever, right? But, to you, sort of, so the scenario that I've been talking about a lot with a first-round pick is that in the 16 to 20 pick range, you obviously could get an offensive tackle, for example, because the Vikings are going to lose 2 tackles, in free agency next year. They're not going to re-sign them. It's Matt Khalil Smith. They're both bad. The Vikings, on average, you get an offensive tackle who plays at the level of, like, say, Todd Herremans or Eric Winston at his peak, or something along those lines. And they essentially traded 5 years of that level of offensive tackle play, which seems to be above average to me, for 2 years of Sam Bradford, but not really 2 years of Sam Bradford, maybe 1.5 years of Sam Bradford, plus a half year of discount Sam Bradford. Do you think that framing makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's this weird extremism with how people view draft picks. They're either like, oh, it doesn't matter, you need to get an established player, or like, oh, well, these are gold. And I think the reality of it is you're really only trading first-round draft picks for players if the player himself is outstanding, or the team that the draft pick belongs to can take risks. And I think a perfect example of that, the perfect example of that has been the Seahawks, over the past couple of seasons. They traded 2 first-round picks for 2 different players, or they traded a first-round pick each for 2 different players with the Jimmy Graham trade, Percy Harvin trade. And, both of those trades didn't really work out in different capacities, but the reality was that Seattle was so good that they could offset that. They had such a good roster that they could just take those hits. They didn't need those first-round picks necessarily. But when you have a team like the Vikings, who, despite being a very good team, definitely has their holes, I would become really apprehensive about trading those picks. And, frankly, I was so apprehensive about trading picks to move up in the draft for Wentz, not only because of, my evaluations of Wentz, but also because that trading future first-round picks is, for anyone, can be so dangerous because that player in itself could end up just being a bust. And then you have lost future capital. Or the Eagles aren't that good of a team, especially on offense. And when you're bringing in a new quarterback, you want to be able to build around them. And if you don't have the assets to do so, you're kind of SOL. So I think when you look at a trade where you're trading a first-round pick for a quarterback, but a quarterback who needs supporting cast, like a supporting cast around them, you're not trading for, a top 10 quarterback who can just kind of do it on his own. That's where it's like, this is a bad deal. If it was a situation where, maybe the Vikings traded a second round pick, kind of like the Eagles did a year ago, then it's like something it's easier to swallow. But I feel like first round picks are so valuable that that's where, you as a fan or as an analyst should be uncomfortable.
Well,
so
go ahead.
Where do you put the Vikings on that list of can take those risks, cannot take those risks? Because, you take a look at a team like the 49ers, and you would never trade a first-round pick from that team. They've got, so much work to do. That first-round pick could either be traded down to get a bunch of talent in the second, third round, or to get a marquee player, or a quarterback or whatever. Or you take a look at a team like the Patriots or the Seahawks. They've got such a good core. It's so difficult to break into their roster. The Seahawks have the best UDFA system in the league, too, which ameliorates a lot of that risk. Where would you put the Vikings on that spectrum of the ability to take the kind of risk that allows you to sacrifice a first rounder?
I would put them. It sounds like such a cop out, but I'd really put them somewhere in the middle because I think, on the defensive side of the ball, that roster is so talented and so deep, especially in the front seven. But on the offensive side of the ball, you have, a lot of unestablished wide receivers. You have lots of questions along the offensive line and at tight end, and you have, the marquee playmaker on that team is a 31-year-old running back. And, I think you'll agree with the sentiment, but I think that the offense was carried more so by Teddy Bridgewater last year than a lot of people talk about. And that was, that's a big part of winning football games is the quarterback play. So, I wouldn't put them at the top, but I definitely wouldn't put them at the bottom either. So they're probably somewhere in that like 20 to 16 range in terms of the actual talent on the roster. And I wouldn't trade a first round pick from that team. I think like you said, the offensive line needs help. The wide receiving core. Obviously they just drafted Laquan Treadwell, but I'm just saying overall the wide receiving core is a lot of young or unproven guys, and then there's going to be a question at running back after the season. Maybe Jerick McKinnon can take the reins, but it's something that they're going to have to address along with Kyle Rudolph, who, as far as I'm concerned, is not one of the better tight ends in the league.
No, that's pretty fair. So we talked a lot about, is this trade worth it? Is it, what kind of play? How good is Sam Bradford? What can the Vikings do? What should they have done, etc. So I've got one more question along those lines, and then we can move into sort of, looking forward into the future, given sort of your experience with Bradford. So the last question is, what would you have done as the Vikings GM in this scenario? Like, and obviously, panic sets in. Season's about to start. You've got a competitive team. What would you have done?
Man, I would have waited for the Broncos to cut Mark Sanchez.
No, we should not have done that. No.
No. Okay, Dusty, hold on. Do you think that Shaun Hill is better than Mark Sanchez, Dusty? Seriously?
Let me put it this way. I would rather have Sam Bradford than either Shaun Hill or Mark Sanchez.
That's not the question, because Sam Bradford costs, a first round and a fourth round.
Well, okay, so let's go Sanchez. Back to the last thing you guys were talking about. So Ted Glover actually wrote a pretty great article on the Daily Norseman about Spielman, and I got to take issue with you here, Ben. I think the Vikings in the last few years have probably elevated themselves to top 10, maybe even top 5, draft moneymakers. I mean, we've got 2 extra picks in the next 2 seasons. And sure, they're like a little bit, lower down. They're not first round picks. But in the article, Glover suggests a situation where the Vikings could find themselves with both a high second round and a low second round pick. And I mean, I get the complexity of the situation, especially since, the 2017 draft season is looking to be like, heavy with offensive tackles, which is, as we all know, a position of need for the Vikings. But Glover was able to write the article in such a way that he convinced me that Rick Spielman is a crafty enough person to be able to minimize the damage done by losing a first-round draft pick and trying to take 2 in the second, or maybe like a low second and a high and a medium third. Like, it's not like the draft game is over for the Vikings by giving up that first-round pick. I mean, yeah, it's a lot, but it may be less than you are giving it weight. And
okay, so a couple of quick things, Dusty, and obviously I'll let Ben respond too. I think the first thing is that that the Vikings do have more draft capital, and that allows you a little bit more room to take risk and all that. But I think the argument that Spielman is really good at managing the draft is all the more reason to keep a first-round pick and keep as many draft assets as you have, because he can maximize the value of that first-round pick in a way that allows you to avoid some of the negative consequences of an unknown player in the draft that's really highly rated. I think that a first-round pick can turn into a lot more with a general manager like Spielman, but it is a better situation than a team that only has 5 picks in the entire draft. I think it was the Atlanta Falcons who had something like that. And I think that they, had a lot less room to risk, and I think that room to risk is important. But I do think this other thing, the Vikings are very talented. They may have a top 10, maybe top 7, maybe top 5 roster in the NFL, but they have a lot of holes to fill next year because they're going to be losing Matt Khalil and Andre Smith and maybe Joe Berger in the next couple of years because he's 36. He's older than John Sullivan was. They're going to lose Chad Greenway. They're going to lose Terrence Newman. They're going to lose Captain Munnerlyn. And there's backups to those two, but you have to replace those backups too. They may lose Brian Robinson. There's a lot of players to replace. Even though the roster is good now, there are a lot of players where they have to make investments, and some of those investments almost always, necessitate a heavy investment. Maybe not a first-round pick, but usually a first-round pick. And then Ben, what is your thought on? Hey, the Vikings have a lot of draft capital. They've got a really talented roster. Mark Sanchez is ass. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, the main thing is, of course, Spielman has had a knack for kind of getting these picks. And I mean, from 2012 to 2014, they had 7 picks, 7 first-round picks. That's correct. So he's obviously has the aggressiveness that if he sees a guy in the first round, he's going to take him. He's going to find a way to take him. I think he showed that over the course of the past couple of years. But the reality is they've then made that process more difficult for themselves going forward. Say in this draft, if they see a guy they really like, they've made that process more difficult for themselves because they don't have that first-round pick to begin with. And looking at, going back to the original point of looking at Mark Sanchez, looking at Sam Bradford, I watched both of those quarterbacks. Both those quarterbacks played for the Eagles. Mark Sanchez has been with the Eagles for the past 2 years, and Bradford played played for most of last year.
And who was the starter?
Well, and Sam Bradford was a starter. Nick Foles was a starter over Sanchez. But I will say this for Sanchez: he does have an issue with snowballing, but Sanchez at his peak ran the offense more efficiently than Sam Bradford did. And he ran the offense more efficiently than Nick Foles did. I mean, if you're talking about a guy that you need to keep comfortable and just kind of keep in the rhythm of the offense, support him with a strong defense, support him with a strong running game. I mean, the reality is that Mark Sanchez is the only quarterback of the 3 that we've talked about between him, Shaun Hill, and Sam Bradford to actually go to the playoffs. And, he got to the playoffs behind a strong defense, but he was playing good football in the playoffs, and he was playing good football with a good running game. He was playing good football with a strong defense, but he was playing good football. And if you're gonna take a chance on a guy who needs to be made to be comfortable anyway, why don't you just look at the opportunity cost of all of this and go with the guy that you can get for free instead of getting a guy that you trade 2 picks for? Because
but Sanchez isn't free. Like, he's looking at like so he was being paid $4.5 million by the Broncos, so he would have probably demanded.
No, whatever you pay Sanchez will be less than whatever.
Than the cost.
I don't know what his numbers in Dallas are, but they're pretty low.
All right.
But it'll be less than whatever you pay Sam Bradford in cap space. But the question is draft assets, which are not things that, unless evidently you're the Eagles, that you can buy with money. So
that is okay. That is tough but fair. But Sanchez was cut in favor of a 7th round pick who was never thrown a pass in the NFL.
Really well. You played really well. You saw those games.
I mean, yeah. Well, okay. I haven't actually seen any games with Trevor Siemian, but that's like.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. I mean, so Sanchez was cut because of a 7th round pick, and also because of the amount that he cost. But I also think that he was cut because mostly because of the cost, but also because it provides you a kind of a favor for a veteran that allows them to catch on somewhere else, because they couldn't trade him at that cost. I don't think anyone is arguing that Mark Sanchez is, generally speaking, a better quarterback than Sam Bradford. And although Ben makes a pretty good case that the two are much closer, there are instances where Mark Sanchez can play above the level of Sam Bradford, and has been, in situations that Sam Bradford hasn't been in, because of his ability, in some instances, to avoid mistakes when he's comfortable. Obviously, the flip side of that is that he generates mistakes when he's uncomfortable at a higher degree. I think the argument is more that Mark Sanchez provides an upgrade over Shaun Hill, who cannot throw a quick out or a deep out or a corner route at all, and can throw occasionally over the middle. I think he provides an upgrade over Shaun Hill, but he's not as good as Sam Bradford. I think the difference between Sam Bradford and Mark Sanchez over the course of 2 years is not worth a 1st rounder and a 4th rounder, which I think that's the argument that Ben and I are making. I don't think we're making the argument that Mark Sanchez is better than Sam Bradford. I think we're making the argument that Mark Sanchez, or the next available option, maybe it's Aaron Murray, who I think was overrated by draft Twitter for a while. Maybe it's Austin Davis or whoever. I don't really care. Whoever is in between Shaun Hill and Sam Bradford in terms of quarterback quality, I think is, if you could trade Sam Bradford for Mark Sanchez and a 1st round pick and a 4th round pick, I think if you look at it from that perspective, which is essentially what the Vikings did, then you would generally do it.
And you genuinely believe that there is no additional blood in the water, as Rick Spielman put it, aspect to trying to pick up Mark Sanchez. You don't think that his price goes.
What blood in the water?
The fact that the Vikings find themselves without their franchise quarterback.
What hurts the Vikings from the perspective that they're desperate in terms of acquiring Mark Sanchez? They wait until he's cut, and then they sign him. What does Mark Sanchez do? Demand $1 million instead of $750,000? Great, done.
So I guess no is your answer.
Yeah, well, I just don't see how the fact that the Vikings need a quarterback impacts the cost it takes to acquire Mark Sanchez because he was cut.
Well, then I guess you might have to talk to his agent about that.
Sure, the agent could demand twice as much from the Vikings than he demanded from Dallas, who, by the way, also desperate. And I still think he would command less of a cap hit than Sam Bradford, who I think, where he takes an $11 million hit with the Eagles and a $7 million hit with the Vikings, right? Mark Sanchez could demand twice as much and still demand less of a cap hit, and then also he doesn't cost a 1st rounder and a 4th rounder. The Vikings essentially traded a 1st round pick and a 4th round pick and that quarterback, Mark Sanchez, Austin Davis, Connor Shaw, whoever, for Sam Bradford. That's the issue.
Well, I mean, when you explain it that way, I'm coming around.
I've been told I'm good at arguing. All right.
Even when you don't believe a word you're saying.
No, I mean, in this case I do. But yes. So, Ben, looking forward, what do you think the chances were of the Vikings making the playoffs with Shaun Hill? What do you think the chances are of the Vikings making the playoffs with a different caretaker quarterback, Connor Shaw, Austin Davis, Mark Sanchez? And what do you think the Vikings' chances of making the playoffs with Sam Bradford are?
I'm going to go ahead and say that the Vikings' chance of making the playoffs would be the same with Mark Sanchez as it would be with Sam Bradford. All things considered.
That's brutal.
I know. Way to throw Arif under the bus.
I know that you started off the podcast by talking about sort of the things that you can look forward to, the things that are positive about Sam Bradford. But I think that sentence right there, from you anyway, at least, I don't know if I would say the same thing is necessarily true, but to me, that's you heavily criticizing and indicting the trade from the Vikings' perspective.
Yes.
Okay. I don't know if I agree, but I think it's close enough that we're in spirit agreeing.
I think if you look at what Sanchez can do at his best versus what Bradford can do at his best, what they've both shown, and then you also look at the availability of each quarterback over the course of a season and what they need to succeed, I really don't see a big drop-off. I think that, what you lose with Sanchez in terms of the snowballing thing, that can partially be offset by, running game, defense, whatnot. But you're also getting a huge health risk in Bradford. That Sanchez doesn't really pose the same issue. He's been injured over the course of his career, but not in the way that Bradford has consistently been hurt. So, yeah, you're both guys. There's going to be some time for them to get up to speed, but once they're on the field, I think there's a bigger risk with Bradford when you look at his health and also look at what he can't do for an offense. I really don't think that there's that much lost between him and Sanchez.
Okay, so you think part of the equation is that you'd probably get 14 games of Sanchez, whereas you might get 12 games of Bradford.
Right.
Okay. Dusty, do you have any other questions? Hey, we could ask the questions about the Eagles. Do you think that the Eagles downgraded at the quarterback situation just for this year?
I think that the win total won't change. I think that maybe the product will be different, but the win total won't change because what you lose from Bradford in terms of mistakes, you're probably going to get a lot more back in terms of a quarterback who's taking a lot of chances. I think chances lead to touchdowns. And also just a quarterback who's willing to stretch the field with his arm will open things up for the run game, which needs to be heightened by the passing game, if that makes sense. I don't think the Eagles really have the personnel to kind of create their own run game. I think they're going to need to really, and also the offense that the Eagles run, they pass to set up the run instead of run to set up the pass. It's a lot different than what Minnesota likes to do. So I think that the Eagles kind of made a lateral move in terms of the win total that they're going to get with each quarterback. But in terms of what the Eagles did, they're giving Carson Wentz live reps where he desperately needs them, and also makes the team a little bit more. I think they're going to be a little bit more potent on offense relative to maybe turning the ball over less with Bradford, yet not having any kind of explosive element to their game.
Do you have a sense for where the Eagles would spend the first-round pick they just acquired? Where do you think the team's greatest need in terms of drafting in the first round? Maybe their greatest need is a kicker, but you don't draft them in the first round. What do you think the greatest need for the Eagles is in terms of a first-round pick? Is it another receiver? They've invested a lot of capital over the past 2 years, actually, in receivers. Do you think it's another receiver? Do you think it's along the offensive line? Jason Peters is old and has been injured pretty recently. The defense is really good. You add one more piece of the defense, it could be become an elite defense. Where do you think that first round pick is being spent?
The receiver thing is a wild card because the receivers on the team are so young, and there was a lot of talk about with Chip Kelly and Chip Kelly's offense how they didn't really stress receiver technique. They really just wanted the guys to get back into formation. It was a primarily hurry up offense. The big thing for them was just kind of getting in the right space at the right time. They weren't really teaching how to release off the line, weren't really emphasizing catching technique and everything like that. So this is a really raw receiving group, but also a receiving group with a lot of pedigree. You have a 3rd round pick with Josh Huff, 2nd round pick with Jordan Matthews, a 2nd round pick with Dorial Green-Beckham, and a 1st round pick with Nelson Aguilar. So you have a lot of guys who've been drafted in the past 2 years, 3 years, and guys who are athletic, guys who are at some point, productive during their careers. So I think there's a chance that the receivers take a relatively unexpected step forward this season, with much better coaching. So that might not be the direction they go. I think running back is actually a possibility. Ryan Matthews.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, because Ryan Matthews is talented, but you can't really depend on paper. Yeah, exactly. And he's also expensive and getting older. Darren Sproles is well into his 30s, and Wendell Smallwood is not the type of player you're going to really depend on to be a featured back.
Really quickly, I've got 2 questions then. One about the receiving core and one about just Ryan Matthews, because I'm curious. Jordan Matthews, he should be really good, right? Based off of his college resume, based off of hashtag analytics, based off of sort of his general traits and stuff like that. Do you see him taking a large leap forward?
I think he's going to have a productive season. I think it's going to be limited a little bit by the fact that it's just going to be a rookie quarterback, and that's a big thing to adjust to. But the fact that that Wentz is going to be a lot more aggressive is going to do a lot, I think, for Jordan Matthews. Give him a lot more chances to make those plays. And yeah, I do think that Matthews is going to take a nice step forward. A big issue was he had such a pigeonholed role under Chip Kelly, and hit the success of that role. He was playing primarily in the slot, and they were using him on really short routes, and he was almost a they were using him and dumping the ball off to him and using his ability as a yards after catch guy to manufacture a run game, because the run game was so bad at times. And that they're
they'd only give that role to Josh Huff. That's interesting.
People don't really talk about how good Jordan Matthews was at yards after catch in college, and he was really good his rookie season. But the issue is they're pigeonholing him into that role, and there was no vertical element to the offense, so the field shrinks, and Matthews becomes the primary option in that offense. So they're trying to run their offense through a slot receiver, which just isn't an efficient way to do things unless you have Tom Brady running your offense. So they were limiting the space in which he was able to operate. They were limiting the opportunities in which he was able to have. And on top of that, he himself isn't an incredibly consistent receiver. He has issues with drops. So you don't get to really experience the full bandwidth of what he can do for a team based on the role that he was given under Kelly. So I think an expanded role with Peterson is going to allow him to produce a lot more, and having a more aggressive quarterback should give him more opportunities. So I'm expecting him to take a nice step forward. He didn't get to play the preseason because he was injured, but I've always kind of had. He was my number 1 receiver in the 2014 class, and so I've always really liked him. And he's always been a good player for the Eagles. I think he's going to take a nice step forward this year. But and you said you had a question about the running backs.
Yeah. Well, the more you talk, the more it just seems like the loss of Deshaun Jackson has just been incredible. But running backs, Ryan Matthews, if he never gets injured, do you think he's a top 10 running back? Because I thought he was incredibly talented when he was coming out. Incredibly talented. He
was so good in Philly last year when he was healthy. You turn on his game against the Jets, and he was breaking tackles all over the place. He's making guys miss. He's outrunning. He's a really talented running back, and that much is evident. And if he was the type of running back that you could just kind of depend on his health, that you knew that he was going to play 14, 16 games a season, I would be a lot more optimistic about the Eagles' chance in the division. And I say that as a generally pessimistic person, because he is so good. And if you can give a back like him 300 touches or 300 carries in a season, you're going to have a really, really strong running game. And then you're allowing guys like Darren Sproles and Wendell Smallwood and Kenyon Barner to just kind of be complementary guys instead of trying to take the lead role. So he's a really good running back. It's just you can't depend on his health, and it's such a sad thing because he is so talented. But I think that could be a direction the Eagles go in. this past offseason, before the trade, I was a big proponent of the Eagles drafting Ezekiel Elliott because I thought running back was such a big need, and nothing really changed during this offseason that made me think that running back wasn't still a big need. But another need that the team is probably going to look into is cornerback, because they just traded Eric Rowe today.
Right.
Yeah, and besides Eric Rowe, they have Leotis McKelvin, Nolan Carroll, Ron Brooks, and Jalen Mills. So a lot of guys who you don't want covering Odell Beckham Jr., or Des Bryant, or Deshaun Jackson. So I think that's going to, having an athletic linebacking core and having a good defensive line and two very good safeties kind of offsets having mediocre at best cornerback play. But I think if you want the unit to take a step from being a very good defense to being a top 3 type of defense, they need that elite cornerback. And really the only time over the past 5-6 years that Schwartz has had a really truly elite defense is when he had Stephon Gilmore in the secondary, which we don't have a player like that.
All right, that's fair. Dusty, do you have any other questions?
I have 2. So Sam Bradford in the offseason got engaged to his longtime girlfriend. Mark Sanchez has neither wife nor girlfriend. How do you think that impacts their effectiveness vis-a-vis each other?
Should I give you an answer based off my personal experience with getting married and having girlfriends? Because I've been doing.
How many times have you been married? What?
No, I'm just kidding. That was a
getting married joke. And having girlfriends simultaneously. That actually sounds pretty juicy.
Well, I'm double majoring at NYU, and I'm also a working actor, and I've been doing it all while single. So obviously, if I can do it, then Mark Sanchez should be able to do it, right?
But no. This actually goes directly to my point. You would actually cast your lot with Sanchez rather than Bradford because he's got more time to focus on work and less time to spend on his useless personal life.
Sounds suspiciously like everyone gave Derek Carr.
It's crazy. The reality is that you're just going to be able to take more chances when you're single. So I would just totally
like on the football field. I don't necessarily see how that follows.
Yeah. Okay, I played football, I wasn't single, so I have no perspective on the juxtaposition.
Well, there you go. Well, and Bradford has been with the same girl throughout his season that he was injured. She's been with him through thick and thin.
She's bad news. She's a bad omen. That's what it is.
It's clearly the girlfriend's fault. She should not have played golf at the University of Arkansas. That led to an unhealthy dynamic of competition. Anyway, second question. How much do you think the Vikings can reasonably get for Sam Bradford when they trade him to San Francisco during the offseason?
You say that, but I really don't think that Chip Kelly likes Sam Bradford.
Yeah, okay, well, you're assuming that Chip Kelly will still be there.
Oh, that's true. But I'm still a Chip Kelly stan, so I think he's going to be fine. It's crazy how Bradford continues to underperform and yet still get he fails up like crazy. It's impressive. It's like Paul Ryan. You just cannot knock. I can't knock the hustle.
Whoa, easy on the politics, buddy. He's more like Jeff Zucker, which I think we can all agree he was terrible for NBC. He wanted to cancel Seinfeld. What the?
Ooh. Oh.
Yeah, but yeah. So it's possible that if he has a decent season, it would be. I'm just here for the comedy of life. So if it would be amazing if after this season, the Vikings extended Bradford for another year, and then halfway through 2017, just traded him for a first-round pick again. That would just be comedy, right?
Well, that is exactly the sort of thing that would happen.
Perspective. Yeah, that'd be amazing.
The NFL, the NFL is just crazy with quarterbacks, and looking at the scape of the league, I can't really say which team needs a quarterback besides San Francisco. Maybe the Browns, depending on how the RG3 project works out.
Cleveland always. What do they have to give away?
Yeah, it's totally possible. If a team, I mean, we've already seen what teams will do if they're desperate for a quarterback. I mean, the Rams traded, however much draft capital to move up in the draft for Jared Goff, where they're not even starting this season, or however. I mean, we all know that Jared Goff is just not. That's not a good situation. But like, teams are so desperate for mediocrity at quarterback that they're willing to make these crazy moves, and we've seen that time and time and time again. I mean, look at Brock Osweiler. Brock Osweiler got a $72 million contract for playing 10 games.
Oh my God!
Are we really going to talk about that right now?
Oh yeah, I forgot. Dusty's Denver. Yeah, I'm sure he loves talking about Brock Osweiler.
I'm glad he's gone, and I'm glad someone else is paying him all that money. That's all I have to say about that.
Yeah, so, I mean, we've seen what this league will do. So even if Bradford comes out and he just looks like, if he even looks slightly better than he did in Philadelphia, I'm sure that the Vikings will be able to, get some kind of nice return on it. If maybe not a first-round pick, but definitely some kind of day 2 pick.
Perhaps a high second?
Maybe. I don't know, but I can't wait for the 30 on Sam Bradford's life.
Sam Bradford's infinite first-round picks.
Yeah.
It's just like a cut back and forth of him like sitting on his couch with his knee bandaged up and his like bank account balance going up and up and up.
Oh my God. I mean, to be fair, I don't know what's more impressive, his hustle or the Matt Castle hustle. Because, I mean, it's 4 different teams have spent draft capital on Matt Castle.
Right, but Sam Bradford has demanded more draft capital.
That's true, but Matt Castle is also horribly horrible and never really played in college, too. Like Bradford was good at one point. Like, he was like a really good college player. Matt Castle barely played in college, got drafted by the Pats, traded from the Pats.
Did he play in college? Did he take any snaps in college?
Barely. I mean, I think I could pull up his stats real quickly, but he was a backup. He was basically a backup.
Right. I mean, Belichick drafted him based off of what he saw at USC practice.
Yeah. So, I mean, the Pats drafted him. Then he got traded to the Chiefs, and then he got released from the Chiefs, signed by the Vikings, traded by the Vikings to the Buffalo, and then the Cowboys traded for him, and then Tennessee gave him a contract. Like, that is just incredible amounts of capital invested in a guy who barely played anything.
I know, he's like a football zombie. It's weird.
I know. It's like you cannot kill him. It's amazing. So I think that between him and Bradford have like the most amazing like scam going on in football right now.
It's not a scam. The only scam in the NFL being a quarterback is to not be the worst quarterback, and then someone will offer you a contract.
That's true. Brandon Weeden keeps on getting paid too.
All right, Ben. You have,
basically, if you
is younger than Brandon Weeden. Sorry, I love Brandon Weeden because he is like the most surprisingly old person ever, even though you know in your head that he's old. And so you just have to bring up all these other quarterbacks that are as old.
All right.
Basically, if you have a son, make him play quarterback, and he will pay all of your bills. So
I just realized this. This is how old Brandon Weeden is. So he's 4 years older than Matt Stafford. If Matt Stafford were to enter the 2017 draft, he would be 5 months older or something like that than Brandon Weeden was when he entered the draft. Matt Stafford, he's like 10 years in the league. You could enter the draft and be as old as Brandon Weeden was when he entered it. I love talking about Brandon Weeden. That dude is 32 years old. Do you know how old Tony Romo is? 35. Brandon Weeden has been in the league like 10 years less than Tony Romo and is 3 years younger.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and now that Tony Romo is functionally done, he'll be in the league longer than Tony Romo when he gets another deal somewhere.
Oh my God, that's amazing! I can't get over Brandon Weeden. Like, his existence as a first-round pick, as a draft pick, period, is just stunning to me. Especially coming out of like an offense that did not present itself with like the kind of learning curve that adapts itself well to NFL offenses. Like RG3 coming out of Baylor, fine, he is like 21 or something. Brandon Weeden is 28, and he has to learn how to not throw to Justin Blackmon in a spread offense. Like, that's nuts. Sorry, I just love talking about Brandon Weeden.
All right, Ben. I know you got a lot of syllabi to read. Got to get that first question right on every first week quiz. What is the professor's name, and what are his office hours?
I actually have an audition tomorrow morning. So.
Oh well, in that case, we won't keep you terribly long. But do you have time for one mailbag question?
What?
Do you have time for one mailbag question?
Yeah, absolutely.
You could stay for all of them, but they're mostly all Vikings. One in particular.
If there's like a Sam Bradford pertinent one, I could definitely.
Excellent. Well, Eggplant Dusty, not me, at Dustin Redding on Twitter, writes in with this question. Although sometimes I feel like an eggplant.
Oh my god.
Sometimes I feel like a plastic bag.
The more excited version of Dusty asks.
Oh my god.
So, Sam Bradford or Shaun Hill on Sunday? Do you think the offense is better off week 1 with Hill or Bradford?
Hill's that can actually know the offense to some capacity, so probably Hill.
Well, no, and so that's my thought. This whole as soon as the Bradford trade happened, I was like, well, he's not going to start week 1. There's no way. The Vikings have literally been through this before when we signed Josh Freeman and put him on the field in 6 days.
Not too long ago, very recent memory.
Yeah. Different
I remember that game.
But, wasn't it great?
It was horrible.
Well, and it's on the one hand, Bradford comes from a Don Coryell offense. He'll be somewhat familiar with at least the words that are being spoken into his headset were he to start week 1. But there's no way the Vikings start an untested, unpracticed quarterback again this soon after trading for him, right?
That would be a horrific thing to do, I think.
Well, that's not fair to Bradford. We just talked about how he needs to be comfortable.
Yeah.
So it's no coincidence so Josh Freeman, obviously not an amazing quarterback, but literally the worst game of his career was that game. There's no way that's a coincidence. The worst game that Carson Palmer played ever since he was a rookie, if you exclude his rookie year, the worst game he ever played was the one where he came off the bench for Oakland. That cannot possibly be two sets of coincidences, right?
Well, and dude, the Freeman game not only was his worst game that he ever played, but it soured him on football for the rest of his life. He just sort of trailed off and disappeared.
It's true. He I'm not going to say he quit because he didn't quit the team, but he checked out after that game.
He talked
to beat reporters who interacted with him and stuff he just checked out.
No, he came out of that game with PTSD or something. He was never the same after that. And you would think there are enough people left in the Vikings organization to where they would not do that to someone else.
Yeah, I think we all agree. Thanks for talking us off the ledge and then talking us back onto the ledge, Ben. We really appreciate it.
I'm really good at that.
Yeah, ledge status remains the same thanks to our phenomenal guest, Ben Natan, at the Ben Natan on Twitter. You can find his work at Bleeding Green Times, the Philadelphia Eagles SB Nation blog. What are you working on these days other than acting stuff? Where can we find your writing? Do you have any cool stuff coming up soon?
Well, this week we have now that some anonymous football team gave the Eagles a first-round pick for their quarterback. I'm going to have a mock draft out this week, preseason mock draft, and then
everyone's favorite.
Yeah, I love. I
look forward to reading those comments.
The issue is that the comments on my articles are very colorful, to say the least. So I need to find something to kind of.
You inspire passion, I think, is the best way to put it.
Yeah, I really get people to rally in front of me, not behind me. They rally directly in front of me. So I'm kind of trying to win back some fans with just everybody loves a mock draft.
Do they really?
All right.
Unless I draft someone for the team that they hate and thus the pitchforks are back out.
And then the lineup, as you described.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining us within 20 episodes of your last appearance. We really appreciate it, and your insight into Sam Bradford, I think that
it's terrifying.
Thanks for saying it for me. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. I wish you guys all the luck.
I guess I was hoping for more sunshine and roses than we got, but
that's what he promised me when I invited him on. He's like, I've got good things to say about Sam Bradford, and I was like, great. So I think this is actually just my fault. I think I just poisoned the entire interview. I'm sorry.
Well, I think he was speaking from the perspective of an Eagles fan, where he had a lot of good things to say about Sam Bradford being on the Vikings.
Okay, and that makes sense.
So I guess continue with the mailbag. We've got a handful of questions that were not answered during the interview.
Sure. Let's bang them out.
Excellent. The first one comes from Nicholas Olson at Nicholas J. Olson on Twitter. Should the Vikings consider bringing back Sully, given that Bradford doesn't have time to learn protections and Berger is bad at it?
That's actually a really interesting question, especially because we did allude to it a little bit in this episode talking about Sam Bradford. I don't know. I don't think that. I mean, and some of this comes from conversations I've had, and I don't want to say I'm breaking news or anything like that. I don't think Sullivan necessarily wants to come back to the Vikings. I think that, and part of this just has to do with being told you're not good enough. I don't think it's necessarily something to do with a poisonous relationship with the front office or the coaching staff or anything like that. But being told you lost a job and then being invited back a week later, oh, I'm sorry, situation's changed. I mean, I don't know. That would piss me off. It pisses a lot of people off. And Sullivan, evidently, according to, I forgot who it was I retweeted, yesterday or early today, is considering multiple options. So, he is going to have to learn offense just like Sam Bradford. But evidently, he's entertaining a couple of offers. So I don't think they'll be able to bring Sullivan back. I wouldn't necessarily say that Berger's bad at it so much as that's just he's literally just never been asked to do it. So, maybe he could be good at it, but Berger, I think, has already disclosed that that will be the quarterback's responsibility this year. So, who knows? That is a really good question.
All right, official question asker Tommy Gunn at TommyTheGun13 on Twitter writes in, going to the game on Sunday, tips for watching it live in Nashville versus at the Vikings bar in Nashville? My only suggestion would be to leave Nashville, which would preclude you going to the game.
Now, I'd say this. While you're in Nashville, you should definitely get some Nashville hot chicken. Phenomenal. I mean, it'll kill you, but it's phenomenal stuff. I love it. Super spicy, super spicy fried chicken.
I will never turn down hot chicken.
It's just do it. Other than that, yeah, I would watch it live over going to the Vikings bar. I'm not a huge fan of actually watching games at bars. I'd rather just watch it live where you just the atmosphere just to me is a lot better, even if you don't get the cool replay and stuff like that. But if I'm not watching it at a game, I want to talk about the game while I'm watching it. And the bar is the worst place to talk about the game because it's always the simplistic. Well, you didn't throw it hard enough. It's
I said the coverage, bro. Yeah, exactly. So what are your top 2 pieces of advice for someone trying to watch a game live?
I mean, I don't, because I haven't watched enough games live to be an expert at watching it at a stadium. But I would say, obviously arrive early. But the reason you arrive early is not so you can avoid the crowd, although that's important, and not so that you know where your seat is, although that's important. It's so that you know how long it takes to get food from a place where you want to get food from. So you should figure out where you want to get food, figure out how long it takes to get there, and then calculate before halftime if you can. Like, obviously, you know, if the game is tied and they're driving in a 2-minute drill, like, just screw it. Just watch it.
So you're basically talking about like scouting. Like you have to advance scout your territory.
Scout. And you have to figure out where the bathrooms are, man. That's like, if you can't find a bathroom pretty quickly, that's just the worst, because then the line builds up immediately. And so scout. So that's the first piece of advice. The second piece of advice is to like relax. That's like one of my biggest issues when I go to a game live, is that sometimes I watch the game as if I'm an analyst, and I'm like, you know, oh, like, hey, you know, Cordero Patterson is in. That's a run alert. You know, Adrian Peterson 7 yards back. That's a run alert. I don't see, you know, play action passing. You know, oh, they're an 11 personnel. And, you know, like, that's fine. That's how I watch games. But like, sometimes you just relax. Just like let stuff happen and be like amazed when amazing stuff happens, and be pissed when like bad stuff happens. Just remember that like the person that you're pissed at while you're at a game may not actually be at fault, and you'll be fine.
Those are actually both very good pieces of advice for any sporting event, but especially true for football, given the size of the crowds. And the, well, I guess maybe hockey fans can be chippy as well, but no, number 2 definitely in play as well. Tommy continues, pick your pregame surprise player of the game based on matchup.
Huh, that's interesting. I assume that they mean Vikings player of the game and not like Delaney Walker, because I think Delaney Walker's going to go off. I think he's going to have a great game, despite the fact that, you know, I think Anthony Barr is good and Harrison Smith is good, and, you know, Marcus Mariota is a developmental quarterback who's good for a young quarterback, but, you know, whatever. I think Delaney Walker's going to have a good game. But I think for the Vikings, based off of the matchups, I'm gonna really quickly double check the corners that they have at Tennessee just to make sure that I'm right about this, because I've got an intuition that Stephon Diggs is a pretty good match. Oh yeah, it's Jason McCourty, who is not Altron Werner, and Parrish Cox, who is a person. I would pick Stephon Diggs. Maybe that's not a surprise, but I think that he's got the best matchup. I think that you know, while I don't really trust the safeties, Janoris Cersei and Rashad Johnson, or the linebackers in coverage too much, I just don't see Kyle Rudolph breaking out, although that is a pretty good matchup for him. I really think that Stephon Diggs is probably just going to go off.
All right. Tommy continues, how can someone hold both Teddy is bad for the team and now the team is bad without Teddy opinions in their heads at the same time? I believe the technical term for that is called cognitive dissonance.
Yes.
You should ask Trump voters.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, I don't know. People criticize me for being like a downer all the time, which that's totally fair. I get it, especially because like I operate in a space that includes fandom, and it's like, you know, pretty cynical in regards to fandom. But I think that there's a difference between being relatively pessimistic about, like, you know, prospects here and the prospects there and whatever, and like constantly just trying to find problems. And I think that's you're either constantly trying to find problems, right, in that situation where you're like, oh, you know, the team was going nowhere without Teddy, and oh, the team is just awful now. You know, I think that in order to hold those two thoughts, you probably just have to constantly find problems, or you literally just don't have like a sense of self-awareness that like you can recognize that you've shifted frames completely and you're kind of just caught up in the moment. Like those are like the only two options.
Well, yeah, I would agree. There's probably a significant subset of Vikings fans who are maybe not enthusiastic for them to fail, but very fatalistic about the team's prospects no matter what is happening. And so the last thing that happened is probably the latest reason why they're going to fail.
Yeah.
Tommy's last question. Will the Vikings break the NFL record for most run plays in a game this Sunday?
I wonder what that record is, because I think that if we know the record, we can better answer it. And I think I can find that out pretty quickly. My intuition is no, just because there's been a lot of games where people have run the ball a lot.
If we didn't do it last season, we're not going to do it this year, is my suspicion. I mean, we have, like, it's a Norv Turner offense and everything, and I'm still not convinced that he really understands that you could throw the ball on first down if you really wanted to. But
this does give us maybe the perfect storm to have the most rushing attempts, right? Because you've got such a significant difference, even a greater difference potentially than between Christian Ponder and Adrian Peterson, although probably not Adrian Peterson 2012. But you've got such a significant difference between the quality of the quarterback and the quality of the running back. You've got an offensive coordinator that is even more willing to run it than one that was the offensive coordinator for a record-breaking season. But I think if we didn't see that in the Christian Ponder 2012 versus Adrian Peterson Adrian Peterson 2012 is one of the best running back seasons of all time, if not the best, narratively certainly the best. Then we're probably not going to see it. So I just pulled it up. So the most rushing attempts since 1940 have been in 1948. So that's not useful. Let's not count that as a record. That was 70 rushing attempts at 4.1 yards a carry, which is actually pretty good for them in rushing attempts. Since the merger, there's been a 69 carry game from Kansas against Cincinnati, week 1. It was a 24-23 win, 3 rushing touchdowns, 3.87 yards an attempt. And in 1981, there was a 66 attempt game from Dallas to Baltimore. And in that case, it was 5.4 yards. So you can see why they kept running it. They had 354 yards on the ground, 3 touchdowns.
So basically, there's no way. Given AP's average yards per carry,
run the ball more than 60 times.
Okay.
Right, especially because the way that the pace of the modern NFL is, you might not get 69 plays.
Yeah,
much less 69 running attempts. And
exactly, and at 3 yards a carry, yeah.
Oh, this is great. So I'm looking at this game. So the team that ran it 66 times, Dallas, they also passed the ball 18 times. So they were 7 for 18 in passing, which that's whew. But they had a ton of plays. They had some 80-odd plays. That's crazy.
Do you happen to have their time of possession in front of you?
No, it was 1981. They didn't really keep time of possession stats.
Oh, okay. Dennis Nardi writes in with an email question. Actually, he writes in with a relatively long email, but I'm going to take the last sentence. Sorry if this question is too long-winded. Feel free to cut it down to, why not more shotgun? Although, to be fair,
I appreciate that.
This question specifically addressed Teddy's relative success with the shotgun compared to other passing plays and other run design plays. But feel free to answer as though Sam Bradford were playing.
Yeah, so this is obviously a much different question now, but I did take a look at the splits between Sam Bradford out of shotgun and Sam Bradford under center, which, by the way, in order to do that, you have to go all the way back to 2013 because he did not take that many snaps under center in Philadelphia, and that is not a product of who Sam Bradford is as a passer. That's a product, obviously, of the Chip Kelly offense. There's just not that many. In goal line situations, he would, out from under center and play action or whatever. His comfort in the pocket seems to be a little bit better in shotgun, but he is less likely to have appropriate timing, I think, with the offense. Not that timing was an important element in the Kelly offense, but I think that he gets a much better sense of timing under center than he does under shotgun. But in shotgun, he just has these other advantages that offset it a little bit. Statistically, it's a dead heat, basically. I mean, there's a tiny change in yards per attempt, a tiny change in pass rating, a tiny change in adjusted yards per attempt. It's basically statistically even, which I think, to me, in my head, it actually makes more sense that he's a little bit better under center than he is under shotgun, because in shotgun you tend to be in third down situations a lot more often. You tend to be in more favorable passing situations that boost your statistics a little bit more than you are under center, because under center, I mean, a lot of closed boxes and stuff like that. So I think that generally speaking, because Adrian Peterson's going to be a much more important part of the team than he was, before the Teddy injury. You do stuff to make Adrian comfortable. Like, before, we were complaining, especially me, were complaining about like sacrificing the comfort of the starting quarterback in order to make, this 30-year-old running back who's still pretty good, but not like, he's not 2012, right? Sacrificing the comfort of the starting quarterback they were trying to develop for the comfort of this running back, and we were both like that. I mean, that really doesn't necessarily make sense, but like you have to do what you can, because Teddy under center is actually not that much worse than Teddy under shotgun. But in this case, yeah, it was significantly less shotgun. Make Adrian Peterson as comfortable as you can. Sam Bradford is fine under center. He might be better under center if you do the splits the right way, and he gets a sense of timing, and timing is much more important in this offense. So, hey, why not more under center?
Why not Zoidberg?
Why not Zoidberg?
Logan Reed, submitting his customary weekly email question. Has Trey Waynes done enough to displace Terrence Newman as our starter, or will Terrence still get the nod at Tennessee? I think it's got to be Newman, right?
Well, I think the official depth chart, as official as these depth charts are, which, spoiler, they're never official, I think the depth chart lists Newman ahead of Waynes. So at this moment, Trey Waynes is not the starter ahead of Newman, which is not, what I would have predicted. I would have predicted that that Terrence Newman would further decline. I mean, he's obviously declined since he was a Pro Bowl, almost all pro quality player to the player that he is now. I predicted that he would further decline, and that Trey Waynes, who looked good at the end of the season, he looked good in the middle of the season in his spot play, and he looked much better in this preseason. I just assumed that they would give Trey Waynes that opportunity now, because he's got a much higher ceiling, and I think that you're more concerned about big plays. I think with this defense in general, you're more concerned with big plays, and I think Trey Waynes does a better job limiting big plays, even though he does a worse job allowing smaller plays than Terrence Newman. So I would have expected Waynes to start for a couple of reasons, but right now it seems like Newman is going to be the starter, and maybe that decision is made with Sam Bradford in mind, right? Like maybe that decision is made with the new reality that the Vikings are dealing with, and they just want fewer mistakes, even more than they wanted fewer mistakes before.
Logan continues. Are there any other starters you think have been moved to the bench, such as Greenway, Robeson, etc.?
It really depends on what you mean by the bench when it comes to Chad Greenway, because he'll only be playing something like 40% of snaps. I do think that they're going to mix in another linebacker just occasionally with Chad Greenway. I don't know if it's going to be significant. I don't know if it's going to be a trial run, or if it's going to be matchup based. But I do think they're either going to put in Lamar or Robinson in for Chad Greenway in 3 linebacker sets in some situations, just to see what happens. But I don't think that Greenway is going to be benched overall over the course of the season. I do think that there is some concern from Brian Robinson that he may lose his job to Daniel Hunter. But my guess is, and the Vikings have done this along the defensive line before, my guess is that Brian Robinson will get the quote unquote start, but there's going to be a lot of games, maybe over the course of the season, the majority of snaps. There's going to be a lot of games where Daniel Hunter gets more snaps than Brian Robinson, and maybe that happens over the course of the season, but I'm confident that'll happen in a couple of games this season. And then I think there's definitely going to be an open competition at safety. I think that Andrew Sandeo is going to get the first start, but I think as Jaron Curse and Anthony Harris get more comfortable, Anthony Harris made a couple of mistakes in this offseason and in training camp. Mike Zimmer mentioned that Jaron Curse obviously has this spectacular upside. But the reason Anton Exum was cut is because he can make big plays, but he also allows a bunch of plays. It's not about the positive plays you make; it's the negative plays that you avoid. I think is Mike Zimmer, me paraphrasing Mike Zimmer, paraphrasing Bill Parcells. And I think that that's the concern with Curse Harris, that you need to be confident at some point that you can avoid mistakes from them before you can start them ahead of Andrew Sandeo. But I do think there's going to be a start from one of those two to replace Andrew Sandeo at some point in the season that is not related to injury.
And finally, a series of questions from first-time email question asker Matt Lutman. Is there someone who charts preseason one-on-ones for Green Bay? And if so, did Sitton have a down year in the preseason? People are counting the Bears out, but they've quietly stocked their passing game, including Sitton as a pass blocker.
I don't know. I talked to a couple of people who pay attention to Green Bay about this, but I don't know. It sounded like, from what it sounded like, Sitton was having a fine offseason. He wasn't having like sort of the quality offseason that I guess he normally has. But I think that there was probably a decline from Sitton, but not one that would justify this, right? Because Sitton is the best pass blocking guard. Last year was the best pass blocking guard in the NFL, period. More than obviously partner TJ Lang, more than some of the guards, Alex Boone, right? More than a lot of guards that people talk about. And a drop off, even a significant drop off from that to whatever, is not cuttable, even for the amount of money that he was making. And I don't think it was pretty obvious that he was that he had dropped off in that way. So, who knows? I don't know of anybody who is tracking one-on-ones in the offseason for Josh Sitton, nor do I know anyone who is watching Josh Sitton very closely in the preseason. So I couldn't answer this with any like real finality or certitude. But it seems like based off of the offseason that Sitton was having, that this is still a surprise.
One prominent commentator keeps saying the Vikings were woefully unprepared at the backup quarterback position. That seems dubious to me. And by the standard of the Vikings' 3 quarterbacks prior to any injuries, how did the Vikings' quarterback depth stack up to the rest of the league?
That's a really good. And so I've seen a couple of places, Ted Glover's excellent piece. I think it was either Austin or Brett Anderson wrote a piece over Vikings territory. I'll link that too. But both of them lay blame at the feet of Rick Spielman for the problems that the Vikings had in depth that led to this situation. Teddy goes down, you don't have an answer, you have to, now you're in panic mode, teams know it, you have to trade a high pick for it. But I think this question about Taylor Heinicke is a really important one, and I think it really complicates the analysis we have about Spielman's moves in the offseason about grabbing a backup quarterback. And don't get me wrong, I wanted the Vikings to grab a backup quarterback in the draft. I've talked about it. I thought that they should bring in a better undrafted free agent than Joel Stabia. I thought that, hey, maybe you could get, Vernon Adams in, right? Or you could get, they brought in Marquise Williams, for example, into tryouts. And I actually really liked Marquise Williams a lot more than Joel Stabia. But, Williams didn't win a tryout spot over Joel Stabia, who was the undrafted free agent with a contract, who performed well enough to stave off Williams or whatever. A couple of quarterback prospects were interesting to me, sort of in the mid to late rounds, or there's an undrafted free agent that I thought were better than Stabia, who is clearly just not ready, may not ever be ready. But with all of that in mind, it's very clear that the Vikings valued Heinicke a lot, and they valued him enough that they thought he could definitely grab the backup spot from Shaun Hill. And the way they were talking about him, the way that, based off of who I've talked to in the organization, they love him, and they thought that Heinicke could have been a viable backup quarterback who even had the potential to be a starting quality quarterback with enough development. And obviously, there's only 20, 25 of those, in the world. Like that's obviously a very high projection. But they thought that the kernel of that was there. They thought that, Heinicke had advanced a lot. And I think that if you think of Heinicke as a guy who is a 45, the 45th best quarterback or the 37th best quarterback or something, a guy who's not in the top 32 of quarterbacks, but in the top 50 of quarterbacks. If you think of Heinicke as that, which I think is eminently reasonable, definitely possible, and certainly potentially more than Shaun Hill, who is maybe 37th, maybe 40th, who knows, then I thought the Vikings actually had very good depth going into the offseason. If Shaun Hill is your third quarterback, even after how much he's declined, then I think that your depth is in a really good spot. Your depth will always take a hit, obviously, when a player goes down. The Vikings obviously have very poor depth at quarterback right now. Or I guess not anymore now that they've traded for Sam Bradford. But, the Vikings had very poor depth after their starter went down. But, the Vikings, I don't think there's any question in my mind that the Vikings had a lot of depth on the offensive line to start the offseason. There's no question, right? They didn't necessarily have talent along the top, but they had depth. And then Phil Lodeholt retired, and then Mike Harris had this weird injury. I think John Sullivan isn't on the team anymore, who would have added or contributed to the depth in some way. And that's 3 offensive linemen gone, right? And then now you go from a team that had a lot of depth at the offensive line to a team that is maybe not thin right now, but certainly kind of lacking in depth in some respect, maybe a little bit less depth than you'd want. along the offensive line. So I think that the fact that the quarterback room did not have a lot of depth after 1/3 of the quarterbacks disappeared and the other third put their foot through a door, I don't think is Spielman's fault. I think the fact that Taylor Heineke put his foot through the door was just unanticipated, and I think that their depth would have been fine in a normal situation. It happened 2 days before training camp. What's interesting is that Spielman did lay the groundwork to some capacity to find another quarterback to compete. He already talked to the Eagles in the spring at a leadership conference, actually, about trading one of their quarterbacks. But it's just not worth it, given, hey, maybe Shaun Hill's degraded, but I think that a lot of people would say he's one of the top 64 quarterbacks in the world, which would make him a backup quarterback. And Taylor Heineke is probably one of the top 64 quarterbacks in the world, which would make him a backup quarterback. And now you've got two quarterbacks who are in the top 64. They're probably in the top 50. They're probably in the top 40. I don't see how that's not depth. So I think that who wrote the question? I think that you make a really good point. I agree with you, and I think a lot of people are saying the opposite, that the Vikings really screwed up by not pursuing quarterback depth in the offseason. And again, I think that they should have pursued quarterback depth a little bit more aggressively than they did. But I don't think that what happened. I mean, 2/3 of the quarterbacks they expected to roster disappeared. Of course, you're not going to have enough depth. So I don't really blame Spielman for the necessity that drove the trade. Obviously, if the trade goes south, I'll blame Spielman. If the trade goes north, full credit to him, mea culpa from me. But I don't really blame him in the same way that a lot of people are.
I think given the nature of just the Vikings as a team, we should get an exemption from the league to keep like a 135-man roster.
Yeah, I think that would make a lot of sense. I mean, just given 2010, 2011, 2012.
2013.
It would only be fair.
Well, 2013 was okay, but only because we were able, 2014, 2015, and now 2016.
Right.
135-man roster.
Okay, so if you do that, here's a question. If you do that, does Green Bay get a dispensation? Because they're the most injury-prone team in the league over the past, 6 years, 5 years, and 4 years.
Aaron Rodgers would be down for that. I can promise you that.
How much would it help the receiving core, do you think? They had to go to Devonta Adams, immediately, and he was balls. Do you think that adding, 100 players to the roster would produce one better receiver than Devonta Adams?
Having an extra 6 positions or an extra 6 players at that position might make one Jordy Nelson.
Right. Maybe, I don't know. What are the league's rules against Voltroning a better player?
Well, no, as long as they're all allowed to be active, then you can just swap them in as needed. And then when 2 of them are injured in the same series, you've still got 3 more that might even last half a season.
That's a good point. So would you take a situation where the league grants special dispensation to the Vikings, where they can expand the roster from 53 to 90 during the regular season? Would you take that if it also meant that the Green Bay Packers got to expand their roster from 53 to 90?
I think as long as it did not apply to the Steelers or the Ravens, I would be okay with that.
Well, and now I'm super curious about your response. Why?
Just because, they've those are the two other teams beyond Green Bay that I can think of as battling starter injuries are Baltimore and Pittsburgh. So
I'm going to add one name to that: the Indianapolis Colts, who I think are second to Green Bay in adjusted games lost, the Football Outsiders metric for injury, and that was before. Yeah, I haven't checked the most recent injury, AGL, whatever, for the 2016 season. But that was before Andrew Luck, was bad because of a couple of cracked ribs and then was gone because of more cracked ribs. By the way, right now, the Indianapolis Colts are out their starting cornerback, their second cornerback, their third cornerback, and I believe also their fourth cornerback. So I'm going to talk about a team that's missing depth because of injury. Maybe you give the Colts a 90-man roster. The only thing is, I would expect the Vikings and the Packers and the Ravens and the Steelers to use a 90-man roster effectively. And I think that Ozzie Newsome has fallen off from his heights. I think that he is diminished as a general manager than what he once was. I think that Ted Thompson is kind of overrated as a general manager, but I think that all four of those teams could manage a 90-man roster very well. But I also think that Ryan Grigson could not for the life of him.
All right, one more team to add to this burgeoning thought experiment. Dallas Cowboys.
Oh, that's interesting. Who have they lost besides Sean Lee? Right, they keep losing Sean Lee, like again and again and again, and they also lose players to suspensions. I don't know if in this thought experiment you give teams credit for losing players to suspension.
I mean, I think you have to. You're just talking about a roster size, so they should be able to swap in backups for people that can't stop hitting women and drive a drunk or whatever they're doing, or bailing drug tests.
Yeah, but like in this scenario, the league just is like you're so unlucky that you get more roster spots. And I don't know if the Cowboys are unlucky. They just keep signing dipshits.
Jason Witten is just a bad judge of character.
Well, I think it's more that
maybe it's not him. Yeah, that's fair. Maybe it's just that Jerry Jones is a crazy person.
Indifferent judge of character. Like Jerry Jones could be a very accurate judge of character and just not care. For example, right? He's like Rolando McClain, sure. Randy Gregory, why not? Well, Greg Hardy, come on down.
At some point, you'd think he would start caring, right?
Well, I mean, the suspensions kind of came all at once, didn't they?
That's fair, but I mean, as soon as you mentioned Greg Hardy, it was just like, well, that is the best argument for Jerry Jones's total indifference to character concerns, and also the best argument for him slowly becoming wise to them. Hopefully, starting this season.
Yeah, starting this season. One additional note on the Dallas Cowboys receiving or not receiving dispensation. If it wasn't for how good Dak Prescott looked in the offseason, Jerry Jones had mentioned that they might have signed a Johnny Manziel. Just putting it out there that maybe he is completely indifferent to character.
So there's a decent chance that Mark Sanchez ends up in Dallas before the end of the season, right?
No, he's there. He signed.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, so
100% chance, in fact.
So when Dak Prescott, starts falling from a shooting star, people are going to call for Mark Sanchez to start, which will be hilarious. And then when Prescott gets injured, despite being behind the best offensive line in the NFL because it's the Dallas Cowboys, then we get to see Mark Sanchez perform behind a really good offensive line with Des Bryant.
Quote unquote perform. As long as everything else in the game is going well, we'll be fine.
Zeke Elliott's there, so Sanchez has worked with some pretty great running games, but my guess is this is going to be the best running game Sanchez has ever worked with, even at USC.
And not to bring up an argument that we were having, or that I guess I was sort of having with you and Ben when Ben's not here, but I mean I can appreciate the Vikings wanting Bradford over Sanchez because they want somebody who is, maybe less susceptible to snowball mistakes.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think that you're going to find triggers for those snowball mistakes more often with the way the Vikings are constructed because of that offensive line. So, I think that, I prefer Bradford to Sanchez as well by a pretty significant margin. It's the only problem for me is just the cost. That's all.
You just prefer to have Bradford and a first-round pick, maybe?
Well, if I could have Bradford and a first-round pick, yeah. But, I prefer to have Sanchez and a first and a fourth.
Well, there you go. If you would like to submit a question to the Norse Code mailbag via email, the email address you can do so at is norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. Hat tip to Alex Jury, who trolled the crap out of me after asking me a bunch of questions about cookware. He then demanded a refund after having to listen to the coffee back and forth from the last episode. And I was like, well, if you really want a refund, I guess we'll give it to you. And then he was like, I got you. So I'm just going to give that money directly to the Loch Ness Monster. I'm going to tell him where you live, Alex. Once he knows you got $350, he's going to want more. You can check out our website, norsecodepodcast.com, for details on becoming a contributor to the show, and also episodes, show notes, things like that. DailyNorseman.com is the SB Nation site that is kind enough to host our podcast as well, along with a couple of other great shows. You can find, I guess, a little bit of Arif's work there. You can find a lot of your work at coldomaha.com and 1500espn.com now. Do you have anything exciting coming down the pike?
I mean, I'm kind of exhausted because I think the Bradford article is like 7,000 words or something like that. I actually have not had any sleep at all for the past, I want to say 2 days. So I'm going to do that first. That's coming down the pipeline for me, sleep. After that, I'm really curious about really digging into the Tennessee Titans. So there's two strains of thought that I have. I forgot to ask Ben this question. This is actually a really good question. But is an article I want to explore. Is either I want to either break down the Tennessee Titans, especially Delaney Walker, who I think is fantastic as a tight end. I think he's a top 5 tight end in the league, and he just doesn't get his due. I think he's better than Greg Olsen, for example. I think Delaney Walker's great. So I'm either going to break him down and talk about how the Vikings need to manage him in combination with that fantastic running game that they're developing in Tennessee and Marcus Mariota and sort of the receivers that they haven't touched, Sharp and Kittle, right? I don't want to do that. Or I want to dispense with the evaluation of the Sam Bradford trade and move forward with the best way to incorporate Sam Bradford. And I want to write that article, and I probably will only be able to write one of those two. But that's what I'm envisioning in terms of the next thing that I write. Between those two, what do you think is better?
Oh, Lord. Either would be fine. The Norse Code host in me wants you to do the first one, since we won't really have an opportunity to do a preview of the Titans game, and it would be nice to have that covered in writing. But the Vikings fan in me wants you to do the latter, because I've spent, maybe 20% as much time on Twitter as you have in this 2 weeks, and I am super duper exhausted by the hand wringing and kind of chatter and perennial disappointment of that large subset of Vikings fans. So I can't imagine what you must feel like, and it would be nice to try to close the book on that and start looking forward towards the kind of things we might hope for and might expect from Sam Bradford's Vikings.
Okay, fair enough. I'm mostly if I could sleep, I think I would have a better handle on stuff.
I don't blame you. I actually had a night last week where I got to do I'm just going to lay in bed for 5 hours instead of sleeping, and then spend the next crucial hours between 6 and 11 a.m. reflecting carefully on every bad choice I've ever made in my life instead of doing anything useful with that time. So, it sounds like you're not quite in that state, but I do hope you get some rest.
All right.
Beyond that, you can find Arif on Twitter when he's awake, which is usually, it turns out, at Arif Hassan NFL. I am at Dusty O'Connell. Our producer James is at Big Mono, and the official show Twitter account is at Norse Code DN. We're also at facebook.com/Daily Norseman for all of your Norse Code needs. I do want to take a second and say thank you for turning me on to Food Wars, which in our in our hangout, I foolishly I hadn't seen it, but I foolishly assumed that it was an actual food show, but it is.
Oh well, you'll get some nuggets of information that will improve you marginally as a cook, but that's
less a food show than it is a hilariously sexy anime.
Yeah, I'm surprised at how much sex there is.
But there isn't really any sex. It's just
it's all
these people having orgasms as soon as they eat the food. It's
right, which is the best way to enjoy food.
I seek out foodgasms in my life, and I wish I could have them on a weekly basis as are presented to us in the course of Food Wars. So definitely watch Food Wars if you like to laugh. If you don't like to laugh, don't watch it, because you won't enjoy it.
Yeah, it's some of the, I don't want to call it raciness because it's not risque, but it is, but I take it with the same grain of salt that it took Gurren Lagann, which was like it's very clearly making fun of like the ridiculous fan service that exists in anime.
No, the entire show, like the cooking parts, like the culinary school parts, like all of it is extremely tongue in cheek, which I find to be a great way to enjoy anything. So, strongly recommend. I feel like there might have been one more thing I wanted to mention before the end of the show, but whatever. We're at the 2-hour mark, so I'll call it good until next week.
Solid.
So for Arif and James, and of course our amazing guest Ben, I'm Dusty O'Connell, and until next week, life is pain, and existence is meaningless. We'll see you then.
Norse Code is the official podcast of the Daily Norseman SB Nation blog and is produced with cooperation from Pompous Jerk Productions. Pompous Jerk Productions. Attitude with attitude. The opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of their contributors and do not reflect official positions of the Minnesota Vikings, SB Nation, the Daily Norseman staff, or PJP. No information in this podcast should be construed as gambling advice. Please obey all local gaming laws.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.